Became an industrialized country during the Progressive Nation period. During this time, most children were required to work in factories and didn't go to school. World War I changed education a little bit because more people were required to go to school for literacy skills. World War I also brought an influx of immigrants to America, and they needed to go to school as well to learn the English language. In the early 1900s to 1950s, school eventually became mandatory. The Great Depression brought that back a little bit, whereas children were more required to work in factories, but it did go back to normal. World War II brought a bunch of new immigrants to America, and this became a time of patriotism as America tried to Americanize these new immigrants. The crash in 1930 prompted the Great Depression. This destroyed the economy and made it mandatory for most families and children to work. We went back a little bit because at some point before the Great Depression, many children were in school. On the other hand, women were granted the right to vote in 1919, which prompted the beginning of the women's right movement. And of course, we had World War I and World War II during the Progressive Nation period. Women began working outside of the home more often and were seen more so in factories and warehouses. Many immigrant families came to America as a result of World War I and World War II, and this changed schooling because we began trying to Americanize and grant these people citizenship. It established junior high schools in 1909. This meant that the average schooling period went from around 5 years to about 8 to 9 years. Native Americans were granted full citizenship in 1924. This meant that they were required to send their children to school as well due to the compulsory education laws. The compulsory education laws required citizens to send their children to school. This benefited America in many ways. For one, jobs were freed up so that more jobs were available to women and men in the workforce. For two, it created a core fundamental of learning so that everybody had a general education. The period changed quite a bit. We went from a traditional setting in classroom, which meant that we had a teacher-centered education system versus student-centered. The total schooling averaged only about 5 years, and children eventually became required to attend school due to the compulsory education laws. Most children actually preferred working in factories because it was all they had known and they were assisting their families. During and after the Progressive Nation period, we shifted from a teacher-centered classroom to more of a student-centered classroom. This meant that programs became available based on students' abilities. Super intelligent male children went to college prep classes, whereas future stay-at-home mothers took home ec. People that were going to work in warehouses and factories took shop classes and classes similar to that. When it came to immigrant education, the goal was to Americanize these students. So their curriculum consisted mostly of learning English and American citizenship questions and American history. Parent resources became available as well. Schools often stayed open on weekends and on evenings during the week to provide literacy classes to adults that had never had the opportunity to go to school when they were kids. Typically were used to prepare students for what the work they were going to be doing after they graduated. Of course, the core fundamentals of math, science, grammar, and reading were taught so that all students had a general understanding of these topics. However, in the early 1900s, the typical philosophy of the classroom was to prepare students for their work after graduation. This is why programs were created such as college prep, auto classes, shop, home ec, and etc.